We have talked at length. This particular issue for you, Jen, in particular, when it comes to Israel-Palestine, is it's very serious. And there is conflating constantly about what people mean, what they intend to mean, and all the while we're looking at a very real situation here where there is an attempted genocide of the Palestinian people. And right now they're being very successful at it, not just with the indiscriminate bombing, not just with now what's being reported as constant assassination, gunning down of individuals left and right. But there's also the issue of disease, famine. All these things are going to result because people have been displaced. Their supplies, particularly food and water, contaminated. And all the while, I'm looking around thinking, well, if you're going to do that, how do you think people are going to react to the Jewish community who are screaming from the, and let's be very clear, there is a huge difference between Zionism and Judaism, and people try to conflate those two things together. And the Zionist community are constantly talking about their fear, they're going to come and hurt us. And yet all the while, they're the ones that are, just completely killing everybody.
It's a preemptive genocide. It's a preemptive genocide. That's what it is. We're going to genocide them because we're scared that that's what they're going to do to us. And that's really what it comes down to. And we've talked about this a lot on our show. I am anti-Zionist. I'm a recovering Zionist. I'm second generation Jewish South Floridian. My great uncle physically built the original Young Israel in North Miami, like old school. And we were brainwashed and we were lied to. And I was used as a tool in ethnic cleansing by high school in Israel. And you want to talk about what human shields are? Human shields are when you take a group of students, brainwashing them, lying to them, and bringing them into the West Bank and having them plant trees. That's human shield. Settlers are human shields. You want to talk about a human shield? That's a human shield. So I do have a very strong position on this because I was personally brainwashed for the better part of 40-something years by the state of Israel. So, I mean, not the state as a whole, but by the propaganda machine. And so for me, when I look at anything coming out of there, I don't believe a word that comes out of them at all. Not one. And when anybody questions the word of the Palestinian Authority or the health ministry in Gaza or whatever it is that they're questioning, I don't know whether they're telling the truth. I don't know the answer to that. But I sure as hell know Israel's a liar. So based on that, they have no credibility to me. So I'm never going to believe them. That's just the fact.
How do you see it, Loner?
I definitely don't see it that way. I can see how people who are describe themselves as anti-Zionist might get called anti-Semitic unfairly. I guess the problem is that people use the word Zionism. Some people, when they say it, they really just mean like pro-Netanyahu or pro-Israeli right. When other people say it, they think it just means like Israel being allowed to exist and like at least within its current borders, and it can exist alongside a Palestinian state. That can be a Zionist position. Some people think it means Israel conquering the entirety of historic Palestine. Some people think it means, I've heard people say that like one state solution for two people isn't incompatible with Zionism because Jews would still have self-determination in a binational state. So that word, I don't really know, but I guess as far as the most well understood definition, I think, although it's not the same as Judaism, the Venn diagram between Zionism and Judaism is pretty close. Most of the world's, most like Jewish people in the world have at least some connection or some sympathy for the state of Israel. So I guess that's why when you're attacking Zionism, you are kind of attacking like an opinion that most Jews hold to some degree, right?
Yeah, it's my mission to destroy that. Because Zionism, Judaism has been around a lot longer than Zionism, and it'll be around a lot after. It'll be around long after. Zionism is a failed white supremacist settler colonial experiment from Europe. It has nothing to do with Jews. In fact, they used the Jews to create it, and it really only services white Jews. So the Mizrahi Jews, the Sephardim Jews, those Jews are not treated the same in Israel, never have been. It's a white settler colonial state. In fact, the Palestinian Jews that existed there and lived side by side during the British Mandate, they never had a problem with anybody there. It wasn't until the white settler colonial state came in and tried to take over the indigenous people like we do everywhere else. So Zionism is really this idea that Jews are an ethnicity and deserve their own state as an ethno-state. I do not support the idea of ethno-states, because in order to have an ethno-state, you have to conduct an ethno-cleanse. And that is just not something that I'm with. The fact that Jews are threatened by the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" is a projection of their own genocidal tendencies and fears onto people that just want their own freedom. The fact that one group's freedom to some people interprets the annihilation of them, that's in their own head. I suggest they get some serious psychiatric help for it. But one group being free, if that threatens people, then something's wrong with their program. If you are threatened by another group's freedom, you need to really examine that. Okay. And that's the problem, is that you cannot have a Zionist state that is a democracy. It cannot exist. It is the antithesis of that, because it's by definition an apartheid state. There's two types of citizens.
And there's no justification, this isn't justifying what Hamas did. But as you've pointed out many times, one person's terrorist becomes another person's freedom fighter. If you did not, like, I look at it a couple of ways. Like, on the one hand, if you can't recognize that Israel is an occupied state, like, that is what it is by definition. And then in addition to that, there's also the financial motivation that is coming to the surface now, that there is trillions in natural gas value in Gaza. That, again, is that the reason that
Well, there were some leases given and granted, sure, and permits that were apparently given in June, July. Mm-hmm. Is that completely unrelated? I don't think so.
Well, that's why usually after the fact we find out about so much of this stuff, and then you realize that, oh, okay, so this was intended to happen all along. And then the other thing that maybe a lot of people are not either privy to or just not paying attention to is the fact that Netanyahu's government has been funding Hamas for years and years. And so there has to be, again, this whole conversation about nuance. What is the sensible reality here, and how do we come to a conclusion without there being a complete genocide of the Palestinian people? How do you see it?
Okay. I think I disagree with just about everything both of you said. I don't know how much you guys want to argue about it.
No.
We can. I took like 4 notes. Let's see. The claim that Netanyahu's government was funding Hamas is completely false. They were never doing that. Like, the thing that accusation, what it's based on, is a complaint that came from the Israeli right wing. What Netanyahu was doing was allowing Qatari aid money to go into Gaza through the Israeli channel. And his purpose of doing that was twofold. One was because the PA were in a fight with Hamas and they had frozen funding. And also because I guess he foolishly thought he could buy some silence from Hamas, which I guess he did believe until October 7th. But it was Qatari money that was going into Gaza, and it was humanitarian aid. So I don't know if I can see why an Israeli right-winger would get angry about that, because they think don't give Gaza humanitarian aid because it'll go to Hamas, which I think some of it might have. But that's if you look at the full context of that Netanyahu quote, it was humanitarian aid that was going to Gaza, not Israel themselves transferring their own taxpayers' money to Hamas. I don't think the only time Israel has ever given money to members of Hamas was pre-1987, back when they were a charity. So that claim is false.
We'll disagree on that. I've heard the audio recording of Netanyahu stating that they have funded Hamas. And again, there's probably, everything can be nuanced. There's a reason why he was clearly giving them money. But if that is the case, then wouldn't you say it's reasonable to assume that part of the reason that they are funding them is for whatever their political desires are, that whatever the Israeli state had in mind? Because it all comes back to the Palestinian question. If you want to have a Jewish state, don't you by definition have to remove the Palestinian people?
Depends, but you can be a Zionist and want a 2-state solution where the West Bank and Gaza, which again, the Israeli right doesn't want that. The Israeli right is probably okay with Hamas doing attacks because it keeps them in power and it keeps the West Bank and Gaza disconnected. But I'm almost, say, 99.999% sure that there's no audio recording of Netanyahu saying that they were funding Hamas. That's not true, I don't think.
I
As
don't know
for-
about that.
Colin, if there's audio of net, I don't know where you would find it, but if you can look it up and see if there's anything there, I'd appreciate it.
I know nothing about that. But what I do know is that the concept of a two-state solution was never really intended to be a real thing. It was sort of made up as sort of like this justification for colonialization. And interestingly, I forget, like this, and this is part of the problem when I do audiobooks, is that I can't actually go back and look it up. But if you get an opportunity to read Ilan Pappy's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, highly recommend. But there was actually a renaming committee that was brought in to actually level things and rename them. And they actually, Jewish children that are born in Israel are raised to believe that things are ancient Hebrew ruins, when in fact they're 75 years old from their family, from villages being destroyed, right? Like, this has been a nonstop propaganda, very purposeful, intentional campaign. You got to put it back.
Yeah, so I know some of the Israeli government propaganda about 1948 is still quite strong. There have been efforts to move it away depending on who's been in government. So, for example, the reason we know about so much about 1948 now compared to what we did pre-1980s was because Israel disclosed their archives, right? The surrounding Arab countries don't do that because they're dictatorships. So we know that because of them. We know that through the new historians, people like Benny Morris and Ilan Pappé and Avi Shleim. But as far as you're saying that Israel, there's this claim you're making that I think both of you said that Israel can't exist without oppressing Palestinians. Well, I don't know if they can't.
I will say it cannot exist as a Jewish state giving privileges to Jews over non-Jews as it is now, and be a real democracy.
Loner, would you say that that's fair? Would you say that there is a prioritization for Israelis over Palestinians
There's
in terms of rights?
52 laws that are. It's just a fact.
Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So the problem there is especially since the nation-state laws, there are lots of there's a lot of legal discrimination that happens, which again can be overturned within a state, right? You didn't need to abolish the United States to get the Civil Rights Act passed, right? So there could be things that are done and advances that are made towards equalizing relations between Palestinians who live in Israel and Israeli Jews. Yeah, I think that's very possible. But I don't think that Israel needs to occupy the West Bank and Gaza forever. They don't need to do that. They could, there isn't a conceivable future where Palestinians have self-determination within the West Bank and Gaza and Israelis have self-determination in Israel. Because the fact is, you say ethno-state, right? The fact is though, it's in the interest of both parties to be majorities in their countries, right? If Israel rammed their country full of Jewish settlers even further for the next 20 years, and suddenly the entire territory between the river and the sea was 80% Jewish, and Israel then said, okay, we're going to abolish Israel. We're going to be a one state. We'll even call it Palestine. I think Palestinians would be perfectly within their rights to reject that, because then they would just be 20% of the population. And then they wouldn't get their self-determination.
That's basically what happened over time. We've seen it happen over time. And the truth is that if Israel had any interest in actually allowing for Palestinian self-determination, they'd already have it. They had their Jewish state in 1948. They did. They had it. They could have given, and in fact, the Palestinians could have had what was that, and they could have shared East Jerusalem. And that was what they were supposed to do. That was the plan. But you know what? Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered, but that wasn't enough for them. So then they had to go in 67 and now be sitting in violation of international law. And it's very hard for me to have a reasonable discussion about the legitimacy of a country when it just exists in complete violation of international law.
Wait, you're saying that was the plan to give them East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza in what, before 67?
No. Well, no. The plan when the British mandate, when Israel declared itself a state in 48, the idea was that it would be alongside of a Palestinian state. That was always what the UN plan was. The plan was, and that they would share a neutral East Jerusalem.
Yeah, but the Arabs rejected that deal, not Israel.
In the very beginning, yes. In the very, very beginning, yes. But then again, they didn't say, okay, but in 67, let's encroach even further. And then since then, making it virtually impossible for there to ever be a Palestinian state by walls and highways and infrastructure. And, they've made it actually impossible. I have not heard a single expert on this say that there is any possibility of having a two-state solution at this point, based on what Israel has been doing since 1967.
I think, yeah, settlements have obviously, just to be clear, I completely disagree with any settlements. They should never have started in 6-7. They shouldn't have, well, they annexed East Jerusalem in the 6-Day War. They shouldn't have done that either. I don't think, I'm sure you could find a few people who say it's not impossible. Like, you would have to remove some settlers, at least some of them, if not all of them. You would have to give land swaps for any settlements that do stay in Israel's hands, like the bigger ones near the Green Line. But I don't think it's impossible. I mean, if it is, it's still more possible than any alternative I've ever heard of.
Every year it's proposed, and I forget the exact thing that it's called. It's something to do with the UN. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So every year it comes up, and every year Israel rejects it. So I agree, in the beginning, in 1948, the Palestinians were definitely not keen on them taking the majority, and they were not hip to that. But since then, there have been many, many opportunities where the Palestinians have come to the table and wanted to be taken seriously for negotiating. And Israel and the United States have done everything they can to make it so impossible since then. And that's just what I mean, and, you know, yeah, maybe in theory it could be done, but look at Israel. Do they seem like they're wanting to retreat? Do they seem like they're wanting to give up power? They're annihilating the West Bank right now. They're giving settlers military arms.
Loner, do you see any, do you agree with the sentiment that the IDF is indiscriminately murdering civilians?
Indiscriminately murdering? No.
You think that they're targeting Hamas and the civilians are just in the way?
It's just collateral damage.
No, it's between. That's somewhere in the middle, at least based on the most recent thing I read about it. It seems to be the case that they are picking targets, so it's not indiscriminate. Indiscriminate would be Hamas rockets. They're indiscriminate. You can't aim them. As far as Israel's going, it seems to be the case that they are picking targets. They used to, as far as I know, I don't know if they still do anymore, they used to, at least in previous wars, go by what was quite close to American and European standards, which is like, there are some targets that no civilian death is worth it. There are other targets that are worth like 4 or 5, others that are worth 14, 15. Maybe like a very high profile general is worth like 30 collateral damage civilian deaths. It seems to be the case now that they're a lot more tolerant of collateral damage, and they're also doing this thing where they attack, which is called power targets. Like the idea that they will.
It's indiscriminate. I think you're right. There's nothing indiscriminate about it. I think it's extremely purposeful, which is why it all falls within war crimes. Interestingly, currently Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin are being sued by the name of the organization. I can't. Human Rights, whatever.
As far as I'm concerned, it started with George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, and of course Dick Cheney, who should all be in The Hague, as far as I'm concerned. But there's a hell of a lot of people in power positions here in the United States. Now our president, as well, as far as I'm concerned, who frankly could just go join him, because our business is war. Our business is endless war, and they have no intention of this thing slowing down. But if you had the authority to bring this to a solution, let's say, what would it look like from your perspective? Because right now, this is absolutely insane what's going on, but something's got to give.
Right now, I would have given a very different answer, just depending on different stages of the war, or even before October 7th. But I guess right now, unfortunately, and I don't like this, it seems to be the case that they've reached the point of no return. I don't think any amount of pressure is going to get them to ceasefire now, that you've got like supposedly Hamas people surrendering quite a lot, and they're as far as Khan Yunis. The only town next is Rafah. So I think they're going to be there until Hamas have completely lost control of all of Gaza. And then there's going to be an insurgency. So I think if we're on this path, and if they can make sure that Hamas loses control over all of Gaza, and someone, I don't know who, decides to reoccupy and rebuild, then if we reach that point, and if Israel succeeds in what they're claiming they're going for, then they have no more excuse. They need to make sure there's some kind of consolidated Palestinian Authority that has control over both Gaza and the West Bank, that Palestinian polity is actually connected, because you can't have peace with 2 separate people running Gaza on the West Bank. You can't do that. You can't negotiate that.
But, that's why they did that, right?
Well, I wouldn't say Israel did that. I mean, they had the Palestinians had an election, and then there was a war. Israel had a part in maybe like picking a side, but I don't think. In any case, if that excuse is gone, there is no more excuse, right? So Israel will have to aggressively pursue peace with an empowered Palestinian leadership, free settlements, start to clamp down on settler crimes, dismantle the settler outposts that even Israel considers illegal, and then just try to push from there. I think like as soon as, if they actually achieve what they're going for, which is I think the only good scenario that seems to be the case, is actually if they get rid of Hamas, then all the pressure needs to be on Israel to start to extend that olive branch towards peace with some Palestinian Authority.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.